I'm Harper, 34. 2 weeks after a layoff, I moved back into my childhood room, thinking it would be a stopgap. 3 months, maybe 6, until I found something steady. 8 years later, the house still had my name on the utility bills and my fingerprints on every appliance. What was supposed to be temporary turned into me quietly underwriting a life I hadn't signed up for. The first year felt like helping family. I paid overdue electric and gas bills so the heat stayed on. Then I replaced the collapsing sofa because my dad's back couldn't handle the springs anymore. I bought a washer and dryer when the old set finally died, then a proper dining table so holiday meals didn't happen on mismatched folding chairs. I stocked the kitchen, a decent coffee maker, a blender that didn't explode, pots and pans that didn't warp after one use. Little by little, the house looked like whatever adult life I'd tried to build was happening under my name alone. I kept every receipt, filed invoices, and made a spreadsheet because if you're going to pour money into people you love, at least track it like a project. I wasn't asking for credit or ceremony. I covered the utilities, fixed things, bought the big-ticket items, over $15,000 worth of furniture, appliances, and kitchenware. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Zoe, floated through the years contributing exactly nothing except her presence. Staying out late, crashing on the couch, never picking up a tab, never offering to tighten a screw. She was the kind of person who could make being carefree look like a full-time job. I covered the bills. She kept her schedule open. It didn't feel heroic anymore. It felt like being the family's default bank account, an unpaid property manager. I missed rent checks I could have used to live on my own, interviews I couldn't take because I was needed at home, relationships that didn't survive the I live with my parents chapter. But I kept quiet and kept paying until the quiet started to crack. The ledger wasn't just numbers to me. It was proof that my generosity had limits. They told me over dinner like it was small talk and not a fresh knife. Mom, Elaine, and Dad, Tom, smiled across the table and said, "We booked a 10-day Caribbean cruise. We could only afford one extra ticket, so Zoe's coming with us. You'll understand. You're the strong, responsible one. Hold down the fort." They said it like a compliment, like responsibility was my assigned role and not a consequence of being the only adult who ever paid a bill on time. I laughed then, because the alternative was to choke on the word betrayal. I pointed out calmly that I'd been covering utilities, replacing failing appliances, buying furniture when the house literally didn't have anywhere to sit. I reminded them I'd lent them money more than once. Mom waved it off. "We're struggling, honey." As if struggling is a night out in the Caribbean and not a monthly pattern of emptying my account. Dad said Zoe needed the trip to heal after her breakup, made a little theatrical sniff, and because sympathy trips apparently have the same price as luxury cruises, there we were. One extra seat and my name nowhere they wanted it. They framed it as an economy of emotion conversation. I was practical, stoic, dispensable. Zoe was fragile, in need, the natural choice for indulgence. It wasn't even subtle. They used every family cliche. You always put others first. You'll understand. And each one landed like an invoice I wasn't meant to dispute. The worst part wasn't the cruise. The worst part was how easily they rationalized leaving me behind after 8 years of my money, my sweat, my time. Their hardship argument had the same elasticity as a vacation brochure. I didn't explode. That would have been dramatic and satisfy no ledger. Instead, I went back to my spreadsheet as if numbers could translate the tone of the betrayal into something neat and provable. I opened the folder where I'd kept every receipt and loan note and stared at 8 years of receipts like a map of favors that had turned into expectation. The knot in my chest loosened into something colder. Calculation. If this was how they saw me, then I would stop being a line item they could ignore. The cruise left in 3 days. I started writing the plan in the margins of the bills. The morning they left, the house felt too loud. Suitcases slamming, laughter, the tinny sound of a travel playlist, and I waited until the engine had been a block away before I moved. There was no dramatic gasp, no last-minute pleading. I walked through rooms like someone doing an audit of an estate, clipboard in hand, and a calm so exact it felt surgical. I had spent a week preparing. My spreadsheet had become a ritual. Columns for item, date purchased, cost, receipt number, and a tiny column labeled Notes, where I wrote the stupid little reasons I'd bought things. So Dad wouldn't break his back on that springy couch. Reliable washer, so Mom stops hand-wringing about laundry. I printed everything and slid it into a binder whose spine I had labeled in bold. Property claim. I mapped the house into zones and highlighted every object I'd ever replaced, upgraded, or outright bought. I zipped my receipts into clear sleeves and numbered the boxes I planned to take so each item would have paperwork to match. I booked an executive suite downtown for the week, a quiet place with a washer-dryer, a balcony, and a couch large enough that it could not have lived my life before it lived mine. I did it under my name, with my card, at an hour when I knew they would be at customs tracking the ship's snorkeling itinerary. The irony that I would sleep that night in a space I'd paid for felt like a small, sweet justice. I hired movers. I had to, because the couch I'd bought was big and heavy, the dining table a solid slab of wood that took 2 people and a curse word to lift. I watched them carry the TV out like a solemn procession. Me, clipboard. Them, straps and sweat. I packed the kitchen in stages. The blender in a box labeled kitchen. Blender, receipt 47. The set of pans in kitchen, pans, receipt 12. The washer and dryer came last. I sat in the laundry room and closed the door as they unbolted them. For small things, the coffee maker, the set of knives with the plastic sheath I'd insisted would make the parents stop butter knife cooking, I wrapped each in bubble wrap, taped the receipts to the outside of the boxes, and took photographs of serial numbers. I left the house cleaner than I found it. I wiped counters, tightened screws, and removed my name from online delivery accounts. But I did one thing I knew would land like a photograph. I moved Dad's old recliner and placed it dead center in the living room. It looked absurd on the bare hardwood, a single monument in an amphitheater of emptiness. I set the recliner so the remote rested on the right arm. The cushion dented like the memory of him. The worn-out sofa they'd had before I replaced it was shoved against the wall, threads loose and springs complaining, exactly where it had always been, the visible thing that proved I hadn't taken everything. I left the original mismatched folding chairs in the dining room. I left the cheap lamps that had belonged to Mom's mother. I left the house with its skeleton visible and the new furnishings gone. Before I closed the door, I took one more inventory photo. The living room with one recliner in the middle, the empty space where my dining table had been, the washer's empty niche. I snapped a picture of the binder, the printed invoices beside it, and then walked to my car as if I had been running an errand. The movers followed with straps and ballast. I drove to the suite with the boxes like trophies in the back of the van, the city skyline growing as my chest uncoiled. Unpacking felt ceremonial. I set the dining table, placed the TV where it belonged, slid the washer and dryer into their alcove, and arranged the kitchenware with a care that suggested I had always intended this life. I sat on the couch I'd bought for them that afternoon and felt the cushion give under me like an answer. There was a small, ridiculous moment. I poured a glass of boxed wine, opened the binder to the first page of receipts, and smiled without the need to apologize or to explain. The calendar on the wall of the suite still had last month's date. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the house that had been mine in everything but name was finally full of my things. They didn't let it go quietly. Within days, the family group chat filled with versions of the same story. Harper the villain, Harper the gold digger who stole their things and ran. Mom posted a long, breathless message on her timeline about how families are supposed to support each other, with a single line about being heartbroken that her daughter would take advantage of them. Zoe took the spite route. Texts to mutual friends that painted me as dramatic and unstable, screenshots of my posts clipped into little narratives. Dad called my old boss and left a message about a problem at home that felt suspiciously like a hint meant to make an employer nervous. They didn't need to agree on a single lie. They only needed to repeat it until it sounded like truth. People I thought I knew sent tentative messages at first. Is this true? And then the tone shifted as gossip did its sift. A few friends stopped answering, others asked for my side like an audition. I could have panicked. Instead, I did what I'd always done when facts mattered. I documented the smear. I saved screenshots of posts and messages, printed copies of the group chat, and made a second binder marked communications. I emailed a scanned copy of the property claim binder and the communications binder to 2 friends I trusted, one of whom is an attorney, and to an accountant who owed me a favor from college. I also sent my parents a formal list of the items I took, with attached receipts and a clear note that I was open to discussing repayment plans for any disputed items, provided discussions were calm and factual, not performative. They kept at it. A neighbor received a call at work about missing furniture, and a distant cousin posted a sympathetic comment under Mom's status that trended toward a public bonfire. Zoe's friends private messaged my coworkers with their version of events. It hurt. None of that was clean. But the ugliness didn't have the receipts. It had the same airy quality as an accusation born of convenience. When the smear picked up local traction and my inbox received the kind of venom usually reserved for true villains, I made one practical decision. I stopped riding the tides of other people's narratives. I replied publicly with a short, factual post that linked to a PDF of my spreadsheet and the receipts. Nothing theatrical, just the documents themselves. I redacted personal bank numbers and any information I didn't need to share, but the essentials were there: dates, vendors, amounts, serial numbers. The post didn't explode. It simply existed where anyone curious could read it. I also CC'd my parents on a polite notice that if they continued to promote demonstrably false claims, I would consider legal remedies for defamation. That sentence was a tiny, practical sword. It was also enough to quiet the more performative contacts who didn't want a subpoena in their inbox. The backlash didn't flip into a chorus of apologies overnight. People are slow to unlearn the songs they've been humming. But the steadier truth did its work. The attorney friend sent a terse note to Dad's phone explaining what constitutes proof of ownership and how a claim without evidence looks in court. Mom's public posts lost their steam once confronted with the receipts on my public post. Friends began to delete accusatory comments as the ledger made argument awkward. Zoe, who had been loudest in private channels, shrank when the receipts matched the dates on which I'd bought brand new things she'd been photographed using. It wasn't poetic justice so much as paperwork making a rude interruption. What I wanted most in the end wasn't to humiliate them in return. It was to be seen as an adult whose boundaries had been ignored. The binder and the spreadsheet did that better than my anger could have. They made the invisible visible and left less room for the comfortable family narrative that had painted my patience as inexhaustible. After a month of low-level war, the chatter cooled. Friendship networks that were based on convenience drifted away. The ones that mattered did not. I moved the recliner into a corner of the suite and never let it become an altar. A month later, I leased a small, sunlit apartment with a view of a park and started scheduling interviews without checking in at home. I set my phone so family calls went to voicemail unless they were scheduled. Mom left a brief message one Sunday that said, "I miss you." And for the first time, it felt like something other than an attempt at leverage. I didn't rush to answer. I let it sit in the spool of messages like an unanswered math problem, waiting for the right method. The truth didn't undo years of entitlement or rewrite the comfortable habits that had made me the family's fallback. It did something quieter. It let me stop apologizing for the life I wanted. It let me keep the receipts for the rest of my life and know that if the ledger ever needed to speak again, it would. In the living room of my own little apartment, on a couch I'd paid for, I found a kind of peace that wasn't loud. It was just a ledger closed on one chapter and a pen poised for the next.